let's hop over and do a live demo and actually see JSS Blazer in action. I'm going to switch over to Visual Studio, and you can see that it's just a regular Visual Studio solution. I've got my projects kind of organized like they're Helix, and you can see here that I've got a project for my rendering host, and this is what's actually going to handle the server-side rendering of my application. But the interesting part is here in the style guide. So as I mentioned before, whenever you start a new JSS application, that new JSS application with the existing JavaScript frameworks is going to come with a boilerplate style guide website. And so let's take a look at what that looks like. So I've got it open here in Chrome. And this is the style guide that a new JSS application starts with. Gary and I have re-implemented this entirely in Blazor. So that's how it's running right now. You can see the JSS Blazer logo up here in the corner. Experience editor functionality works. And this is kind of the home page. But where things really get interesting is when you go to the style guide page. So the style guide page has about 20 or so components on it that really showcase how JSS Blazer works, or whatever client SDK you use whenever you start with JSS. And it just showcases a lot of interesting things. Like you can see here, we've got single line text fields. They're completely editable. Multi-line text fields, they're editable. We've got rich text fields, they're editable. They've got HTML that's rendering as you would expect. Image fields, they render fine. We've got server-side rendering support for them. Can do source sets for responsive images in the browser. File fields, number fields, all the stuff that you expect from Sitecore. You can even do some more advanced things. So the layout service makes reusing content really easy. It also makes implementing things like tab components, where you actually have to delegate control of components between parents and children. Here, of course, the tabs don't look like tabs because we're in the experience editor, and they appear a little bit differently just for experience editor support. You can see here the Sitecore context. So this is actually that JSON document that's getting handed off to the rendering host that we were looking at earlier. And the Sitecore context, you've got full access to it from within your components. So if you want to use some data from this to do some of those more advanced techniques, like in the reusing content and the tabs components, it's all here and available to you. We've even implemented the JSS tracking API. So you can do things like trigger events, goals, campaigns, outcomes, etc. From your JSS Blazer application. And that means that JSS Blazer applications fully support all the things that you love from Sitecore, like personalization, marketing automation, etc. So this is the style guide. If you are ever interested in building your own client SDK for JSS, like if you're interested in maybe implementing an SDK for Polymer.js or maybe web components, Aurelia, whatever, the style guide is a really good place to start, because if you can re-implement the entire style guide in your custom client SDK, your SDK is going to be fully functional. You can build almost anything with it, do any Sitecore integration that you like. I'd also recommend that if you're interested in building your own client SDK, go search online for Sitecore MVP Adam Lamar's video on building a custom client SDK for Sitecore JavaScript services. And he'll actually walk you through how he did all of this for a client SDK for Svelte.js, which is really cool. So at this point, let's get out of the style guide and let's actually look at some JSS in action. So I've started up a very simple demo page in Sitecore. And if we go here and go to presentation details, you can see here on the final layout tab, I've got a single component called Symposium Demo. This is a JSON rendering. It's not a controller rendering because, of course, we're not working in MVC. And this single rendering, if we go here and look under the page components, it's just got 3 fields on it. It's got a demo text field, it's got a rich text field, and it's got an image field on it. And what we will do is we'll just build a very simple component with JSS Blazer that will render these 3 fields. So let's swap back over to Visual Studio, the solution we had. Well, actually, before we do that, let's go and look at the page and see what it looks like. So if we open up the experience editor, you can see that JSS is displaying this component cannot be found. So all of the client SDKs, whenever they can't find an implementation for a component that needs to get rendered on the page, you'll see this kind of orange box with the name of the component that is missing its implementation. So we can take this component here, we'll just copy the name of it, and then we'll go back over to Visual Studio. And here in our client, the styleguide.client project, this is where the style guide is actually implemented. So in the components folder, you can see these are all the components that we had to implement for the style guide. And what we can do is we can just come here, add new class, and we'll create a new component called symposium.demo and then give it a Razor extension. We can add that. And Blazor components, they all use the Razor extension because when you're writing Blazor components, you're just using Razor like you're used to in ASP.NET MVC. So for JSS Blazer in particular, whenever you're starting a new component or making a new component, the first thing you're going to do is use inherits. Let me zoom in a little bit because it's kind of zoomed out, maybe hard to see. Yep, 150% should be good. You'll inherit from this JSS component base type. And the first thing that we wanted to do was render a single line text field. So to do that, you'll just use this component called text field. This component is going to get processed and rendered as HTML in the browser whenever JSS Blazer executes. And the first thing you want to do is just pass a field parameter to it. And to this field parameter, you can pass a property from the JSS component base called component. And then component has a fields dictionary on it. And this fields dictionary is going to contain all the fields from the data source for this component that's being rendered. So in our case, we want to render the demo text field. So we just pass that to the fields dictionary. And that's really all you have to do to render a single line text field. It's pretty easy. You can pass some other interesting things to it. So like you can pass this tag parameter. And if you want to wrap your text field with some HTML markup, so like maybe wrap it with a marquee tag, you can do like this. And then the text field is going to wrap your component with this marquee tag, no matter whether you're in the experience editor, outside of the experience editor, whatever, the text field will handle that for you. Now, if you've worked with JSS React or Vue, you may know this component by a slightly different name. It's called text in those frameworks. But in Razor, the interesting thing is that text is actually a reserved syntax. So you can see here, if I type text like this, that it's getting highlighted in yellow. We had initially called this component text, but we started running into a bunch of compilation issues. So we just renamed it to text field, but it works exactly the same as text in React and Vue do. All right, the next thing we wanted to render was a rich text field. So let's get that off the component. So we just go to this field parameter, go to component.fields. We'll render demo rich text this time. And then for this one, there's another parameter. It's also on the text field as well called editable. And you can pass a Boolean of false to it, and then this won't be editable in the experience editor. Lastly, we wanted to render an image. So that's pretty easy. There's an image component. Again, you just go to field, do component.fields. You can pass it the demo image. And yeah, that's all you have to do to render an image. Now, image has a lot of other parameters that you can pass to it. Like I mentioned before, you can do server-side resizing of your images. You can also do some other server-side manipulations. You can pass a parameter that will actually let you set source set sizes for responsive image resizing in the browser. But I'd like to just show off some regular HTML attributes. So I'm just going to set the height and the width to 500 pixels on the image. And these are just going to get treated as regular HTML attributes by the browser. You can see that they're red, not purple. And that's kind of your hint that these are regular HTML attributes. All the purple text is code that Blazor is going to pick up and Blazor is going to process. So these three components have a lot of code behind them to, again, handle the experience editor switch. So if you're in the experience editor, do one thing. If not, do another. And it's also got a lot of code that's going to handle all these parameters, like putting the tag around your rich text, your text fields, and doing the server-side resizing of your images, etc. So that's something to kind of play with and explore those capabilities. All right, so with this, we've got enough to render our data source that we looked at earlier. So we can come up here to our rendering host and we can hit publish. And now what's going to happen whenever we publish is this application is actually going to get deployed to two places. First, it's going to go to the rendering host for server-side rendering of the application. And then it's going to get deployed to the CM for deploying the components to your browser and doing client-side rendering. Sometimes this publish just randomly fails. I'll do that again. Okay, it succeeded. So we can go back to the browser, refresh, and there we go. Our components rendering as expected. You can see that our single line text field is rendering here as a marquee. It's scrolling by. Our rich text field is rendering fine. You can see all the HTML, and then we've got a 500 by 500 pixel with Sitecore MVP, Alex Sheba's face on it, and yep, everything's working fine. So that's building applications with JSS Blazer. What I'd like to do now is actually take this application or this component that we just built, throw it all away and start from scratch just to show you some regular Blazor techniques. So we'll close these. We'll get out of the experience editor. I just cleared my cookies to do that. And go to our demo page, and you can see the demo page is working just fine outside of the experience editor as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back to Visual Studio and look at just two regular Blazor techniques. First, we're going to look at data binding and event handling. So we'll just throw this away. And what we'll do is we'll make a new component that's just got a simple input on it. It's got a button. And when you click that button, it'll take whatever text is in the input and render it in a marquee. So we need a marquee tag, just like that. And then our marquee is going to it needs to render a string from code. So we can declare a code block like this. And then in this code, in this code block, we can declare fields, we can declare properties, we can declare methods. Your Blazor components are basically classes. So this is going to feel very, very weird for the MVC purists who are watching, because in MVC, you never want to put code in your views, right? You want your views to be passive and really just display the model. All right, so we're going to throw away all the stuff that we had before. Okay, so at this point, let's just throw away everything that we had before. And we'll start from scratch. And I want to show off a couple of different just regular Blazor development techniques that are not specific to JSS and Blazor or Sitecore. First, we're going to take a look at data binding and handling events. So to demonstrate this, we're just going to build a really simple component. It's going to have an input. It's going to have a button. When you click the button, it's going to take whatever text you have in that input, and it's going to render it in a marquee. So let's do a marquee like that. And our marquee is going to need to get its data from somewhere. So what we're going to do is we're going to declare a private field on our Blazor component. And the way you do that is by declaring a code block. So your Blazor components are classes. You can actually put methods, you can put fields, you can put properties on them. And to the MVC purists that are watching, this might feel a bit strange, right? Because in MVC, you don't want to put any code on your views. In MVC, all of your code should be in the controllers or elsewhere. But in Blazor, this is okay. This is normal. This is what you're supposed to do. So we'll make a private string here called marquee text. And to render that, you just do regular old Razor syntax like you're used to at marquee text. And now that string would get rendered inside of the marquee. Next, we need an input. So we'll make that. We'll put the placeholder as text goes here. And now we need some way on our component to get data out of that input. And the way that you do that is with this bind attribute that you can see like this. You just type @bind, and then you'll pass it a variable name. So let's make another private field called input text, like that. And then bind will pass input text. And now whenever you type in this input in the browser, the input text private field is going to get automatically updated with whatever the current value is from the input. Lastly, we need a button. So we'll do that here. Put a class on it, button primary from Bootstrap, because Bootstrap's already included in the style guide. And just put show text as the text. And then we need to handle clicking. So to do that, again, you'll just go and do this @ symbol for an attribute. And you can see that there are a lot of browser events that you can handle, almost everything that you can imagine. But in our case, we want to do on click, of course. And then whenever you're handling events like this, you'll just pass it a method name. So our method name will be called show text, and then we'll come and create that method down here. And so all we need to do whenever that button is clicked is just set the marquee text to the input text value, just like that. So now, whenever we go and type, whenever the page initially loads, there's not going to be any marquee text, so you won't see the marquee. You can go and type in the input. This bind attribute will put whatever you type in the input into the input text. When you click the button, it's going to call the show text method that will take the input text, put it in the marquee text, and then you'll see the marquee text start scrolling across the screen. So that's all there is to it. That's handling click events. That's handling data binding. We can see it in action. We go here. We'll just do a publish. Like I described before, whenever you do a publish with JSS Blazer, the publish is actually going to send your JSS Blazer application to two places, to the rendering host for server-side rendering, and also to the CM for client-side rendering. All right, so the publish is done. Now we'll come back, refresh our page, and there we go. Our new component loads, and we can come here and say, thank you for watching. Hit show text, and there you go. That's data binding, and that is event handling. All right, so now I want to show one more technique that's really interesting, and that's JavaScript Interop. So we're going to get away from the marquee text for this one. So Blazor doesn't have access to all of the native browser APIs. So if you want to do something like geolocation, or if you want to interact with session storage or local storage, there's no native way to do that in Blazor. There might not even be a native way to do that in other WebAssembly applications. So whenever you need to use those kind of things, which you probably will, you're going to have to fall back to a technique called JavaScript Interop that goes back to what I was talking about earlier. So WebAssembly is running in the same kind of execution sandbox as JavaScript in the browser. JavaScript's running over here, WebAssembly is running over here. And if you need to call these JavaScript methods, you can do that. And the way you do it is by using dependency injection. So in .NET Core, dependency injection is a first-class citizen. .NET Core is built on top of it, and Blazor is no exception. And the way that you inject services into your Blazor components is by using this inject attribute. And then you'll just give it the type that you need injected. So to do JS Interop or JavaScript Interop, you'll just inject this IJS runtime service. And then you can give it a property name. So we'll just call it JS runtime. What this service lets you do is it'll let you call JavaScript methods that are scoped to the window. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Whenever you want to go and declare these methods, your first instinct might be, let's just put a script tag in the component and write it there. That won't work. Script tags will not render in your Blazor components currently. All of your scripts have to live elsewhere. They either have to be put on the page directly or in an external JavaScript file. So let's get rid of this. I've already got a JavaScript file created. It's here under www-root called demo.js. And you can see that I've got an object on the window called demo. I'm just putting that there to do namespacing of my function because I don't want to litter the window with a bunch of random functions. And then I've got one function on the demo called alert. This alert function is just calling the browser's native alert API because, again, this is something else that is not available to you as a native call in Blazor at the moment. So what we'll do is we'll use JS Interop so that now whenever we click our button, it'll take whatever's in the text or in the input and it'll show this in the alert. So let's go back and look at how to do that. So we can get rid of our marquee text code here and show text. And we need to make a slight change to our show text method. We'll make it asynchronous because the JS runtime methods are asynchronous. And we'll change our method signature to be an async task. And we'll change this to show text async. And then all we have to do is await JS runtime. And there are two interesting methods on JS runtime, or actually only two. The first one is kind of interesting. It's called invoke async. And if you look closely, you'll notice that it accepts a type parameter. So if your JavaScript method returns a JSON object, you can actually give this method a C# type, and Blazor will deserialize that JSON return value from the JavaScript method and serialize or deserialize it into a plain old C# object. In our case, alert is just a void method, so we can do invoke void async and then pass demo.alert. And you'll notice that we leave window off of here because, again, the JS runtime is always going to be looking for methods on the window, so that declaration is redundant. And then you can pass any number of parameters that you like to your JavaScript method. In our case, we just need to pass input text. And so that's JavaScript Interop. That's how that works using the JS runtime. We'll go deploy this. So we'll publish. Again, it's going out to the rendering host for server-side rendering and to the CM for client-side. There we go. Come back here and refresh. You can see our marquee has kind of disappeared. You are awesome. Hit show text, and there's the alert. So that's Blazor, JSS Blazer in action. I hope you think it's cool. Now I'd like to show you how you can get your hands on Blazor and start interacting with it yourself. But before I do that, I've got a call to action. So JSS Blazer still needs some functionality to have feature parity with the JavaScript frameworks. First of all, it needs a headless proxy. So I showed how integrated mode works with JSS Blazer. There's another deployment model called headless mode. Headless mode is geared for production scenarios whenever you want to have your JSS application running with a CD. With a CD, you don't want to run in integrated mode for performance reasons. And so in that case, you can use a headless proxy that sits in front of your CD to do server-side rendering and offload some of that processing from your CDs. There's already a proxy implemented for the JavaScript frameworks that runs Node. So we'd like to see one implemented for .NET Core. And that would enable this headless functionality for more deployment scenarios and more flexibility with JSS Blazer. Next, a disconnected mode would be really nice to see. So JSS Blazer development is already pretty fast. It's faster than with Sitecore MVC because you're just deploying static assets to the CM, and that doesn't cause the app domain to recycle. It's a lot faster than MVC development, but disconnected mode would not only keep that speed, but also allow you to develop without Sitecore involved at all. And that would mean that you could do JSS Blazer development on any platform, going back to what I was talking about earlier. So you could develop on Mac or Linux in addition to Windows. If we get a disconnected mode implemented, then we need an import process so that you can define your templates and other things in code and have those imported into Sitecore somehow, magically, just like you can do with the JavaScript services client-side or command line tools today. Lastly, we'd like to see GraphQL support implemented in JSS Blazer, so we haven't implemented that yet. And that would enable even more interesting scenarios and development techniques in JSS Blazer. So at this point, if you want to get your hands on JSS Blazer, you can go on GitHub. You can go to jssblazer.cool in your browser, or you can scan this QR code and that'll take you straight to the repository. Hope you've enjoyed the presentation. Thank you for attending. I'm Corey Smith.